evening, I'm Larry Souter, and welcome to Stories of Amazing Grace. We're coming to you from Untitled Chapter, the Madison Church of Christ in Madison, Tennessee. Thank you for joining us online and for being a part of our live audience. And if you are in the Nashville, Tennessee area, come visit us on the first Wednesday of each month, 6:30, right here at Untitled Chapel, Madison Church of Christ, Madison, Tennessee. Be glad to have you. Theme scripture comes from Romans 8:38 through 39. I'm sure that nothing can separate us from God's love, not life or death, not angels or spirits, not the present or the future, and not powers above or powers below. Nothing in all creation can separate us from God's love for us in Christ Jesus our Lord. As a child, Jeff Pearls was told he had no musical talent. But today he stands as the longtime bass singer for the legendary King's Herald Quartet. With 38 years in the music industry, Jeff joins us tonight to reflect on a remarkable journey, one that began with humble beginnings and led to stages in Nashville and beyond. The road hasn't always been smooth, but through perseverance, unwavering faith, and undeniable moments of divine intervention, Jeff Pearls is here to share his story. A story of calling, conviction, and of life-changing power of music. And you'll meet Jeff Pearls right after this.
Sing me a song about Jesus. Sing me a song about His love. Sing with all your might, sing every day and night. Sing it if the way is right or dim. Sing me a song about Jesus. Sing me a song about His love. Sing about His grace till you see His face. Sing me a song about Him. Seeking the lost, yes, kindly entreating, wanderers on the mountains astray. Come unto me, His message repeating, words of the Master speaking today. Drum, 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 they go, rum, bum, bum, a newborn king to see, rum, bum, bum, our finest gifts we bring, rum, bum, bum, to lay before our King, rum, bum, bum, so there's a new name written down in glory, and it's mine. Oh yes, it's mine. Yes, it's mine. And the white-robed angels sing the story. A sinner has come home. Oh, there's a new name written down in glory, and it's mine. Oh yes, it's mine. Yes, it's mine. With my sins forgiven, I am bound for heaven, evermore to roam.
Please welcome Jeff Pearls. Come on up. Hold hands. Sorry about that.
That's all right. That's all right. This is great. Thank you for having me.
Well, would you like to have the quartet back here in December to do a Christmas program? We're working on that.
Yeah,
We're
see
working
if we
on
can
that.
work that out.
So we'll see what happens. Well, no, get my notes here. No musical education.
No,
No
people ask
ability
me.
whatsoever.
No, people ask me where I studied music. I said out behind the barn.
There you go. Well, I heard your story several months ago, and I want to hear it again with very few interruptions from my part. So let's start in Oregon.
Okay.
And how you came to Nashville and your family and your musical ability or lack of musical ability.
Yeah.
Flow forth.
Well, I was born at an early age in Oregon into a family. My mother had a love for the Word of God, and my father had a love for music. And so I grew up, my dad listened to artists like Jim Reeves, Merle Haggard, and then I discovered people like Waylon Jennings, and then after that I discovered 4-part gospel quartet music. So I tell people that I knew who Waylon and Willie were before I knew who the Statesman and Blackwood brothers were. But in about the 3rd grade, we had music class, and the teacher would come in and would try to teach us the notes, drawing the lines and the spaces and all of that. I had been singing in public since I was 4 years old, and started chording simple songs on a guitar when I was 6, and chording songs on a piano by the time I was 10. But the whole lines and spaces and reading music thing never made sense to me. And so I failed every music test that this music teacher ever gave. I was the worst student in the class, and I was so bad that the music teacher held a special parent-teacher conference with my folks and said, "Your son has absolutely no musical ability whatsoever." I didn't find out about that until probably about 20 years ago. My mom told me that, and I said, "Well, what did you say to the man?" And she said, "Well, we just sat there and said, okay, because we knew differently." And so I remember when I was about 12, there was a road that walked alongside of our house and went down to the river where we lived in Oregon. And this was back when you could walk outside and be fairly safe, you know, and I was like, say, 12 years old. It was about midnight one night, and I walked down to that road just to be with the Lord, and I looked up at the stars one night and I said, "Lord, I want you to use me in a big way." I had no idea how that would be, really didn't know what I was asking for. But when I was, a few years before that, I visited Nashville, here in Nashville for the very first time, and I knew that this is where I wanted to live. And so the day after I graduated high school, we came, but I moved here. But about 2 years prior to that, my dad was in the real estate business out in Oregon, and he sang gospel music as well. And the economy hit the skids pretty hard, and real estate was not doing well. And so we rented this old farmhouse from this man, and he let us go about a year and a half without being able to pay the rent until he finally went to my dad. He said, "I can't do this anymore." So we were evicted October 1984. We had no place to go. And so we wound up setting up a 14-foot travel trailer and a tent in the kind of the back field of some of our friends that we went to church with. So I lived in the tent, my mom and sister lived in the trailer, and my dad worked out of state trying to find any work that he could get to send back home. I came home, I guess it was probably about 5 days before I graduated high school, and I had told my folks that I was wanting to come to Nashville to try my hand at the music industry. And I came home, and Dad had this U-Haul truck backed up to one of the storage sheds on our friend's property, and he was putting our belongings in it, what little we had. And I asked him, I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I suppose that if you're going to go to Nashville," he said, "we might as well all go and start over because we've lost everything here." And so I'll never forget, the day after I graduated, we loaded up and we pulled out of that little community. And I was so excited. But all of our friends, as we left in that truck, stood out on the front porch, waved at us. And I'll never forget, Charlie Daniels was singing "Long-Haired Country Boy" on the radio. And I was just so excited I was going to come to Nashville and be able to pursue my dream. I guess it was probably when I was about 14 that I discovered Southern gospel music. There was a disc jockey out in Oregon that played the Singing News Top 40 every Saturday night from 8 to 10. He called his program The Gospel Sing. His name was Daryl Kennedy. We were all in bed one night, probably about 10 o'clock, and I was listening to the radio. I had one of those old-time clock radios, that we used to have. And there was a song by the Cathedral Quartet that came on called Step Into the Water. And I heard that bass line that George Johnson put out there in that song, and it did something to me. I sat straight up in bed and cranked it up as loud as I could. Woke everybody in the house up, and my mom came running in my room. She goes, "What are you doing, waking everybody up in the house?" And I said, "That right there is what I want to do." And I said, "Mom, that promoter is bringing the Cathedral Quartet to Vancouver, Washington, which was about an hour from our home." And I said, "I want to go to that concert." But I wasn't driving at that point. So I made a deal with my folks. I said, "If I earn the money for the tickets, will you take me to that concert?" And so we made a deal, and we went to that concert, and it just totally turned my world upside down. I knew that I wanted to sing gospel music at that point in a gospel quartet. And so several years after that, I found myself in Nashville with no contacts, didn't know no network, nothing. And so I would go to college up here at Volunteer State Community College in Gallatin. And then every day by networking, and I don't recommend this if you're watching online and you want to come to Nashville and get in the music business, don't do what I did, because you'll probably get arrested today, okay? But I would drive up and down Gallatin Road, and I would see those tour buses parked, and I'd just go up and knock on the door. And I would introduce myself, and if it was a gospel group, they couldn't get rid of me. I'd just tell them who I was, give them my contact information, tell them I was a bass singer and looking for a job. And it wasn't until, I think it was 1987, I went to the National Quartet Convention for the very first time, and I had a briefcase full of cassette tapes, my little demo tapes, and I would give them out to anybody that would listen. And I talked my way backstage past a security guard one night. I had no business being backstage, but I figured if I was going to get back there, I had to at least look like a gospel singer. So I kind of dressed like those guys did and kind of hung out, with some of those people. Talked my way past the guard, and I walked backstage, and there's J.D. Sumner over here, and there's George Johnson, there's, Bill Gaither, and all of the people that I had idolized growing up. And so I kind of sat in the corner there and just observed and listened to the music. And there's a gentleman that was singing with one of the groups. He came and sat down next to me, and he introduced himself. And we just struck up a conversation. Well, when we left the back room that night, he said, "Come with me." He took me around to every one of those artists at the Municipal Auditorium downtown Nashville, back where they had the quartet convention down there. And he introduced me to every one of those quartet managers, and he said, "This is my friend Jeff Pearls. He's the best bass singer I've ever heard, and if you have an opening or know somebody that does, you need to hire him." And I pulled him aside. I said, "Listen," I said, "you've never heard me sing in your life. Why are you telling people I'm the best bass singer you've ever heard?" And he said, "Well," he said, "I can tell by the way you talk you can sing." And looking back on that, that was a situation. I've heard people say that the Lord will impress people to do things for you, and they don't even know why they're doing it. You just find favor with certain people. And that was the first time that I could remember that happening in my life. And so as a result of that, I got my first job with a group called the Fox Brothers out of Franklin, Tennessee.
Now, was it before or after that you went to a producer and he rejected you?
That was before. Yeah, that was.
Tell that story.
Okay, well, when I was knocking on bus doors up and down the Gallatin Road, I had read about this one producer, and I thought, if I can go see him, he will hook me up. And so I walked into his office. I finally figured out where his office was, and walked in, and he was the only one in there. I guess his secretary was out to lunch or something, but he was the only one in there. So I walked in, introduced myself to this gentleman, and told him who I was, where I was from, and that I had a cassette tape, and I wanted him to listen to it, because I had come to Nashville to sing bass. So he got up and he kind of listened to it, about a half a song, and he looked at me and he said, "You say you come to Nashville from Oregon to sing bass?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "My advice to you would be to pack your bags and go home, because," he said, "you'll never make it in this town, in this business." And man, that was just, I was deflated. I drove back home. I was living at home with my folks at the time, and I was more hurt than I was angry. And I walked in the door, and my mom asked me how it went, and I told her what happened, and I said, "I wouldn't record for that label if it was the last label on the face of the earth." Well, when I got my first professional singing job, guess who the group I joined was with and recorded for? But you know, it's funny. I became really good friends with that fella, and I don't know that he ever remembers telling me that, and I've never mentioned it, and he hadn't either, but he's booked me several times to come sing on some of his projects. Wow. So, the good Lord just it's all about God's timing. It's all about God's timing. If he would have done what I asked him to do when I asked him to do it, I wouldn't have been ready, and I may have, self-destructed at that point. I don't know, but
you dealt with that rejection somehow.
It just fueled my fire to become more determined that this is what I was going to do. But I learned a very important lesson from that, and that is your family and friends will encourage you and speak positive things to you, but at some point, somebody may tell you the truth. And when they do, it hurts, but you've got to be prepared to at least analyze what they're saying and see if there's anything to it. But it just encouraged me to work harder at what I wanted to do, work at my craft. And so I would go home after school, and when I get through passing out my tapes to all the tour buses, I'd go home and I would sing. And to listen to bass singers, listen to other singers, and then try to emulate what they would do. So that was my voice lessons. So I listened to a lot of Tennessee Ernie Ford and Johnny Cash and some of those lower voice singers,
The first quartet that you sang with was what?
Well, my first group was my family. We sang as a family, but my first professional group was the Fox Brothers out of
Tell me about that.
Franklin, Tennessee. Well, I met them at the National Quartet Convention that year that my friend William took me around and introduced me to everybody. He's the best bass singer he'd ever heard, and he'd never heard me sing. I came home from that little meeting at the Quartet Convention, and it was probably 3 or 4 months later. I was out taking a walk one night. I like to walk, especially in the dark, talk to the Lord. And my mom stood out on the front porch. She started flashing the porch like she started hollering at me. She goes, "You've got a phone call." So I came running back in, and I said, "Who is it?" She goes, "I don't know." Well, it was the manager of the Fox Brothers. His name was Lynn Fox, and he said, "Listen," he said, "we've got a bass singer that his wife is expecting their first child. He's going to have to go home to Missouri for a while." And Lynn told me that he wanted me to fill in. So he said, "Meet us up in Clarksville, and you can learn the material on your way to North Dakota." So I said, "Okay, we'll do that." So my folks took me to the Holiday Inn in Clarksville, Tennessee, and I listened to their program. And then their bass singer got in his vehicle and drove to Missouri, and I got on the bus and went with the Fox Brothers to North Dakota. And they hired me on a temporary basis and asked me to fill in, so I filled in with them for 5.5 years. Yeah.
Tell me about the King's Herald.
That's an interesting story. I was working with a group out of Lynchburg, Virginia, called the Old Time Gospel Hour Quartet. We did a lot of work with Jerry Falwell up there, and I was on my way from Nashville to Lynchburg one day. I got a phone call, and the guy said, "My name is Don Scroggs. I'm with the King's Heralds Quartet." He said, "Our bass singer's getting ready to retire." He'd been there for 28 years, and he said, "Would you be interested in joining our group?" He said, "We have seen a clip of you on YouTube, and we think that you would be a good fit." And I politely told him, thank you. I'm very happy where I am, but thank you for reaching out to me. I was familiar with the King's Heralds because they were my grandfather's favorite quartet. We used to go over to Grandma and Grandpa's house on Friday night and for dinner. And Grandpa, he would have a big stack of King's Heralds records. And after dinner, he'd get in that recliner and he'd fall asleep listening to those records, you know. And we got to the point we were sick to death of King's Heralds by the time Friday evening was over with. And the joke was, he was such a King's Heralds fan that I told, I think, my grandmother, when my grandfather passed away, I said, when he gets to heaven, I said, if the angels don't sound like the King's Heralds, he's going to be mad at Jesus. He was such a fan of that group. And he passed away like about 6 months before I joined the quartet. But so I got this call from Don. I turned him down. He called me 7 times.
7 times?
7 times. And I turned him down 7 times. And on the 8th time he called me, he said, would you be willing to fly out to California where we're based? He said, we're wanting to expand the footprint of the quartet. He said, and you have, sung in various genres and different parts of the music industry. We think that you could probably help us put a plan together that we could do that. Would you be willing to fly out and meet with us? Well, this was on a Wednesday.
With the idea of putting a plan together, correct?
Yes, to putting a plan together to help them to further their ministry.
Go ahead.
After I'd turned them down. So he said, this was on a Wednesday, I said, I can come out there, but I don't have much time. He said, well, when could you come? I said, I can come tomorrow. Well, there was a method in my madness. I figured that if it was such short notice that the airline flight would be so expensive they wouldn't book it. So he called me back. Within 30 minutes, he said, done. He said, we're going to pick you up in Burbank tomorrow at noon. I was like, oh, great. So I fly out to Burbank, and he picks me up. He said, we're going over to my house. He said, we're going to throw some steaks on the grill. He said, the boys will be over. He said, but before they come, he said, I got to make a stop. So he pulls in this church parking lot, and he said, this won't take long. I said, well, I'll just hang out here. He said, no. He said, come on in. So I walked in the church, and we walked in the sanctuary. The sound system was all set up, and the other 2 guys were there.
You've been had.
I'd been set up big time. So they asked me, they said, what song do you know that we do? And I said, I don't know any of your repertoire, none. So the only song that they did that I knew was Have a Little Talk with Jesus. Got that bass lead in it, you know. So we did that, and we didn't get but about 8 bars in, and the baritone singer just died laughing, just started cracking up laughing. And I'm thinking, okay, these guys, they're going to laugh the hillbilly from Tennessee right back to Tennessee. And I found out later that that was his reaction when he really thought something sounded good, liked what he heard. He would just laugh, you know, but I wasn't sure what that reaction was all about. So we sang a little bit. We went, had steaks. We visited. I jumped on the plane, went back home. On the way back to Tennessee, the thought crossed my mind, what if that's where God wants you to go? What if he wants you to sing with him? And I thought, surely not. And this tug of war was going on in my mind the whole flight back to Nashville. So I finally said, Lord, I tell you what. I said, I want a sign from you. I said, if I'm supposed to go sing with those guys, then here's what I want you to do. I said, I want you to, without me prompting them or saying anything, I want you to prompt them to move their ministry from California, where they've been based for 65 years, to move to within a 45-minute radius of my house here in Tennessee. I said, if you'll do that, I'll know that it's you, and I'll go sing with them. Folks, I thought I had a better shot at getting struck by lightning. Really did. I thought I had dodged this bullet. So this was probably in about March when I went out there. and prayed that prayer. Well, I didn't hear much from them for about 3 or 4 months. And then they called me back. And they said, now, we know you've turned us down 7 times, but we've had some changes here on our end that may or may not affect your decision. But we've been thinking, and the new members of the quartet, they cannot afford housing in California, and their wives don't want to live in an apartment for the rest of their life. And so we've done some studies and analyzed where the majority of our support is from, and it's east of the Mississippi. So it said, we think that we need to move our ministry to Bowling Green, Kentucky. Well, at that time, I was living in Greenbrier, Tennessee. Yes. I just shook my head. I thought, God. So I knew what I had to do, so I accepted the position, but I had to tell Old Time Gospel Hour Quartet I was leaving. So I called the manager of Old Time Gospel Hour Quartet, and those boys always called me JP. And he had never done this before, but when the phone rang, he answered the phone. He said, hey, JP, he said, you're calling to resign, aren't you? I don't know how he knew. And I said, yes. And I told him what happened. He said, you know what? He said, God's working. He said, you go with our blessing. And so that was my first date with the King's Heralds was in October of 2005. And so this October will be 20 years. My first date was in Albuquerque, New Mexico with them.
And the group has been around for 98?
98 years. Started in 1927 in Texas. So we have a 100-year anniversary coming up. And some of us in the group are a little closer to that milestone than others. But our tenor singer's been there 43 years. So we laugh in the concert. There's 37 men that have been a part of that quartet. I'm number 27. And I tell everybody when I introduce our tenor singer, I'm going to introduce him to number 2 down on the end, But yeah, it's been fun.
Tell me about Dad and college.
Well, when I had the opportunity to go out on the road full time, I wanted to do it with my dad's blessing. But my dad was a firm believer that since he didn't go to college, a lot of the things that he had experienced in life, he may not have had to gone through had he had a college education. And so I went to him and I said, Dad, I had this opportunity to go on the road. You know it's my dream, but I want to do it with your blessing. And so we chatted, we talked, and he said, well, okay. He said, I tell you what. He said, promise me. If you promise me that at some point in your life you will finish college, he said, I don't care if you're 60 years old when you finish. He said, promise me that you will. He said, if you'll do that, then you go with my blessing. So I made him that promise. And I didn't want to go in debt for school, but I started out over at Volunteer State and then transferred to Belmont. So back then, Belmont was a college. Tells you how long ago that was. And they didn't have all the nice fancy buildings that they do now, but tuition was still, for that time, fairly expensive. And so I didn't take any loans out or anything. I would just work a semester, save my money, and then go to school a semester. So I tell people I crammed 4 years of school into 11. And but I finally graduated. When I graduated, I didn't own anything. So
it's great.
Yeah. So
get ready for some questions.
Uh-oh.
Don Allen's going to roam around with a microphone. You have a story about God spoke. You're wearying me or something. Tell me about that.
Yeah. Well, about probably 10, 15 years ago, I started getting tired. Because I have been on the road for 200 plus days a year for many, many years. I was getting tired. I had been married for 4 or 5 years at that point. I was wanting to slow down. I was wanting some degree of predictability and normalcy in my life. I was wanting to get to know my wife a little bit better, to be around my grandkids a little bit more. And so I just kept telling God, Lord, I need to do something. I need to get off the road. I need to slow down. I need to have more time with my family, with my wife. And so one summer, I was home. King's Heralds generally take the entire month of August off for vacation. So the honeydew list gets kind of long. So on that honeydew list, we had to stain the deck. So it was hot. That August day, so I was out there staining the deck. And I was praying and explaining to the Lord why I needed to be home, why I needed to slow down, be off the road. And the schedule just wasn't slowing down. So I was praying and I was complaining basically as I was staining that deck. And I heard a voice. I thought it was my neighbor. I turned around because I thought my neighbor had come over and said something to me. But this voice said, "You have wearied me with your words." And when I looked around and saw that nobody was in my backyard, I knew it had to be the Lord. So I started listening. And he said to me, he said, "Why are you trying to get out of doing what I've called you to do?" Because at that point I was trying to start a real estate career, something to get me off the road. And he told me, he said, "You keep doing what I've called you to do." He said, "And I will bring you the real estate deals I want you to have." He said, "I don't want you to go out and hustle for these deals. I'll bring them to you." He said, "But if you'll do what I've called you to do, I will make sure that you have the time that you need with your wife. You have the time that you need with your grandkids." He said, "I'll take care of that, but submit to doing things my way." And then he proceeded to give me an itemized list of things that I needed to apologize to the King's Heralds for, and things that I needed to apologize to my wife for. So I didn't want to forget what he told me, so I went in and wrote all these things down and printed it out on my computer so I would know exactly what I was supposed to do. And I did those things. And can I tell you that about 4 or 5 years after that, when COVID hit, and we were locked down, I had all the time in the world I wanted with my wife. And all the time she wanted with me. But, God was faithful. But that's really, during COVID, I'll tell you a quick story about that. We had been out in Kansas City, Missouri, and sang in a little Pentecostal church out there. And it was in April of 2019, I believe, 2020. Well, I got home off that trip, and my throat was just a little bit scratchy, but I didn't think too much about it because that's the norm for me during the springtime. The allergies kind of kick in. Well, by day number 10, I couldn't get off the couch. I had developed a cough that wouldn't go away. The pastor that we had sung for at that little church had called me, told me that she was in the hospital with COVID and that they were getting ready to put her on a ventilator. Found out later that 8 people wound up on ventilators in that church and 5 of them passed away. I got up on day number 10, told my wife, I said, "I got to go to the hospital." I said, "I can't breathe, I can't catch my breath." So I drove myself to Hendersonville Hospital, walked in the ER, collapsed in their chair. They did their little tests and they said, "Mr. Pearls, are you aware that your oxygen level is 67 and falling, and that your heart rate is 247 beats a minute?" And then she picked up that little phone and she said, "I need a wheelchair to the ER stat." Now, folks, I'm not a doctor. Don't have any doctors in my family, but I've watched enough of those medical shows on TV to know that when they pick up that phone and say stat, it's never good. Next thing I knew, I was taking a very quick ride through the ER. My official diagnosis was double COVID pneumonia with acute respiratory failure. I was in the hospital for 9 days. After about day number 3, my lungs were not doing what they were supposed to do. My O2 levels wouldn't get out of the low 60s, or the high 60s, low 70s. And I prayed one night. I said, "Lord, I said, I don't know what your plan is for me. I had no voice. I couldn't breathe, much less sing. And I said, whatever your plan is, I want you to heal me, but if this is as good as it's going to get, I'll find a way to serve you in this condition. I said, but please send somebody by my room today to tell me I'm going to be all right. 3 hours later, this nurse shows up. And he stands in the doorway, and I could tell it was male, but I couldn't recognize who it was because they had the shields and the masks and the hats and all. I call it the hazmat suit. And he'd look at my chart, and he looked at me over in the bed, my chart, and he'd come over and he said, are you the same Jeff Pearls I know? I said, I don't know. Who are you? Come to find out, this was a kid that I had ridden the school bus with in grade school in Oregon. He sat the seat in front of me on the bus, working in Nashville, and he said, I don't know why they don't have you on high-flow oxygen. He said, I'm going to go talk to your doctor about that. And before he left, he grabbed my hand. He said, I just want you to know, he said, my wife and I are going to be praying for you, and you're going to be okay. And man, the tears just flowed. Well, I finally got out of Hendersonville Hospital after 9 days, went home. Now, this was on Sunday. I was in the bed on a Tuesday, and it was 3:30 in the morning. Woke up. I didn't hear an audible voice, but I heard God speak, and he said, I'm going to raise you up. I'm going to give you your voice back. You will sing again, but you need to sing now. I'm on oxygen at the house. I have no voice. I can't even walk across a room without having to sit down to catch my breath. But I began to sing, and you know what, Larry? After 9 days of having no voice and no breath, I could sing every song I had ever sung. I could hit every note just as clear as I'd ever hit.
Really?
And I sang from about 3:30 to 6 o'clock. I got up the next morning and went to see my wife in the front room there and said, good morning, Linda. She said, your voice is back. I said, God touched it last night. And 45 days later, we called the oxygen people and said, we don't need your oxygen anymore. And I was singing for a camp meeting in Ohio. So God was faithful. And but the doctor told me, he said, your lungs are so scarred and beat up from this stuff, this pneumonia and this COVID. He said, you'll probably never sing again. He said, so you probably need to figure out something else that you can do, another profession. But, you know, God had other plans. So praise the Lord, here we are. Amen.
Sure did. Any questions? Don, do you have a question? Don, you're a singer.
Well, I could ask you, what's your lowest note?
What's your lowest note?
That's a good question.
We can have a little battle here.
I don't go any lower in concert than a G, but I mean I can go off the end of the piano, but there's no need,
How about you?
I can hit the G.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
lower?
that's all
And
you
lower?
need. I mean,
Depends on what day it is now, I feel. And he probably knows about that. Some days it's lower and some days it's not.
Yeah, that's right. Some days your voice just cooperates with you more than it does others. Huh? Yeah.
What's your favorite place to perform?
Favorite place to perform? Grand Ole Opry.
And have you done that several times?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, I was privileged to sing backup out there for.
Name some of the people that you have sung for or with.
Dolly Parton.
Okay.
Did some remakes of some old Gene Watson hits. Worked with Daly and Vincent out on the Opry. Daly and Vincent, I don't know if you're familiar with them, they're a bluegrass group, but they did a tribute record to the Statler Brothers several years ago. It was in all the Cracker Barrel stores across the country, so I had the privilege of recording with them. And every now and then they'll call me and ask me to come out and hang out with them and sing some of those songs on the Opry, and that's fun. But singing backup on the Opry, we worked with Alan Jackson, Reba, and a lot of the
just drop a few
lot
names.
of the people.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Don?
What is your most memorable performance?
Most memorable performance was at a church in Houston, Texas. The pastor got there 45 minutes late to open the church. We had about an 11-hour drive to the next place. And I was upset at this man because didn't feel like that he had promoted the concert well. When it came time to start, we had 2 people, and I had a really rotten attitude. And I told the guys, I said, boys, I said, we've got an 11-hour drive. I said, let's just go out here in our street clothes, sing a few a cappella songs for these folks, and hit the road. So that's what we did. And in the middle of our second song, 2 more people came in. So now we got to sing 2 or 3 more songs. So, and then we got through those 2 or 3 songs, and 2 or 3 more people came in, you know. So we sang for about 45 minutes to an hour, and I think at the end of the time there, we had about 11, 12 people. So I was standing out in the lobby, greeting the people as they came out, and this elderly gentleman came out on a walker, and he looked at me and he hugged my neck in tears. He said, "You came here for me tonight." And I realized at that point it's not about numbers. It's not about prestigious stages. It's about people. People everywhere you go are hurting. They're looking for something. They're looking for encouragement. And God really did a number on my mind that night. And so now, you know, whether there's 1 or 1,000, God's called me there to sing His gospel. And each one is important and precious in His sight.
All right, so I've got 2 questions. First is, in your industry, what percentage of folks are believers? And then second question, as we mature, have you found yourself ever having the opportunity to share some of your testimonies with young folks in your industry to pass on some encouragement?
Absolutely. I believe in giving back. As a matter of fact, I was sitting in church one week, and I told the Lord, I said, Lord, I said, my son and grandsons aren't interested in music. And I said, if you would send me somebody to pour into, to mentor, whatever you want to call it, I said, I'll be glad to do that. Not long after that, there was a young man reached out to me. He had just joined a group, and if I called the name, some of you may know it. And so when he's in town, and they've got a couple extra days, and he just sits on the bus, he calls me. And we go out to eat, and we talk about singing, but more importantly, we talk about the Lord. And I've just had the opportunity to share with him, you know, some of the pitfalls that can be on the road, and just try to make sure that he's aware of what they are and encourage him not to fall into those. But to your first question, what the percentage are believers? I would say that in gospel music, the majority are believers, yeah. If not all of them that I've ever worked with, yeah.
This is the first.
Uh-oh.
We have the Stories of Amazing Grace Heavenly Questionnaire.
Okay. Should I be nervous?
10 questions.
10, okay.
Favorite book of the Bible?
Psalms.
My favorite hymn?
Amazing Grace.
If you could perform a miracle, what would it be? If you could perform a miracle, what would it be?
Probably to eliminate poverty from the face of the earth.
Or at least from my life.
Yeah.
Old Testament or New Testament?
That's a tough one. I'd probably go with the New Testament, but I love the Old Testament.
Baptism, river, baptistry, or ocean?
No, baptistry.
What miracle do you wish you could have witnessed firsthand?
I would have loved to have seen Jesus when that man's friend tore that roof off and lowered him down. I'd love to have seen that man, but I'd love to have seen the faces of his friends when that happened.
If you could share a meal with anyone other than Jesus, who would it be from a biblical character?
From a biblical character? Probably the Apostle Paul.
Apostle Paul.
Yeah.
If heaven has a food court, what's your first stop?
Taco Bell.
What's the most unchristian thing you have prayed for?
The most unchristian thing? Man.
I prayed for a Quartet.
I prayed for the earth to open up and swallow somebody one time. I was so mad at him.
When you hear, "Well done, good and faithful servant,"
Yeah.
what do you hope it's for? When you hear, "Well
Being a
done."
good steward and representing Christ well here on earth. But I will say that I believe that there are some deacons in these churches that we've sung at. They're overzealous about a lot of things. And they got the back doors locked before you ever get your equipment out. And then when you start loading your equipment out, then you're locked out, you know. So there's going to be some deacons when they get to heaven going to hear, "Overdone, thou good and faithful servant."
Thank you for sharing your story.
Thanks for having me.
I did not ask what's your most requested song from the King's Herald Quartet, and I hope it's one of these two, but what is the most requested song?
Little Drummer Boy.
Well, I like that one. I like that one. I hope
Yeah.
you can come back here in December and sing that.
Yeah.
But I had Walk in Jerusalem or Oh Master, the Tempest is Raging, because I had some good graphics with that. So let's play those two samples of those songs.
I want to be ready. I want to be ready. I want to be ready to walk in Jerusalem just like John. I want to be ready. Come on. I want to be ready. I want to be ready to walk in Jerusalem just like John. Oh John, now didn't you say, walk in Jerusalem just like John, that you'll be there on that great day? Walk in Jerusalem just like John. Master, the tempest is raging, the billows are tossing high. The sky is o'ershadowed with blackness, no shelter or help is nigh. Carest thou not that we perish? How canst thou lie asleep, when each moment so madly is threatening a grave in the angry deep?
I want to close with a statement that you made earlier. God will allow people to come into your life to do things for you that they don't know why they are doing it. Thank you for joining us, for being with us tonight, and thank you for watching. And take time this week to share your story of amazing grace with someone. Thanks for coming by. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.